Hey guys, welcome back to Anatomy. Today we're going to be talking about the cardiac cycle. So last class we talked about the parts of the heart and how they function. Today we're going to talk about what those different parts, along with our veins and arteries, do to pump blood. So in order to be successful for this lesson, you need three things open. The first is this video where you're seeing the slides. The second is going to be your note sheet. For your notes, they're already filled in, so you don't have to dual screen, but I would have these open just so you can refer to it in case you want more information on what we covered today. And then finally, the notes are filled in because you do have a case study to complete. So you'll do this on your own. This will count as your classwork and your quiz grades for today's class. You have different things to do. So there's a graph creation. You can use an online software if you're in Ms. Renner's class or Dr. McJunkins. I'm sure they've introduced you to one. Or you can just do it on paper and upload an image with your case study. So without further ado, let's get into the work. So to get us started, today we're talking about the heart's different actions and how it functions to pump blood through the body. When we're talking about the heart, we're talking about the cardiac cycle, which is one complete heartbeat. So there are two parts to this. The contraction of a chamber, so when it gets together, is called systole, and the relaxation is called diastole. I have a little video here, which is super cringy, so I thought you guys might enjoy it. But go ahead and get into the song. He'll answer these two questions for you.
Physiology. During systole, the aortic valve is open. Physiology. On diastole, the aortic valve is closed. Physiology. During systole.
And there's a full minute and 45 seconds of that. So if you're into it, you want to play it in the background while you do some work, here's the title. Feel free to go look that up. So if we were in class, we would be doing a blood pressure lab, but since we can't, I want to go ahead and walk you through the different parts that are involved in this in case you're interested in the medical field after graduation. So the first thing is the blood pressure cuff. Blood pressure cuffs, which you've all had put on you at a doctor's office, measure the force of the blood in the vessels through your arm. During systole, the force is greatest. So if you've ever had a blood pressure reading, you know they have two numbers. That first number, which is bigger, is your systolic blood pressure. And then during diastole, it's the smaller number where the ventricles actually relax. So this is the average blood pressure, 120/80. These are other examples for you to see. Everyone's blood pressure is different. So if yours is different than that, don't stress about it. Again, the average is 120/80 for an adult, but that varies person to person depending on how much you exercise and other factors. So you should check with your doctor to see what's a normal blood pressure for you. The technical name for a blood pressure cuff is a sphygmomanometer, which is just fun to say, but even nurses will probably just say a blood pressure cuff. So blood pressure is the force of blood against the walls of your arteries. And during contraction of the ventricle, your blood pressure is very high. That's the systolic or systole. There are a couple different factors that affect blood pressure. The first is cardiac output. So how much is your heart pumping? The second is blood volume. For an average adult, you have 5 liters of blood, but it varies person to person based on size and other factors and can affect your overall blood pressure. Next is blood viscosity. And when we talk about viscosity, you can think of it as sort of like the thickness of blood and its stickiness. So if your blood is less viscous, then it's more likely to flow more easily and you might have a higher blood pressure as a result. And then finally, we have peripheral resistance. So this is the resistance that the arteries place on the blood actually pumping. So blood has to overcome that peripheral resistance in order to pump through your body. Again, the average is 120/80. The higher is the systolic, the lower is the diastolic. Now, there's another tool that your doctor probably uses every time that they're checking your vitals. the stethoscope is an instrument that we use to listen to the heart and measure the sounds that it produces. So that like lub dub or thump thump sound of the heart is actually the opening and closing of the various valves inside. A normal resting heart rate for adults ranges from 60 to 100 beats per minute. But again, this varies based on life factors and also genetics. One other way that we can measure the heart's functioning is through something called an EKG or ECG, or an electrocardiogram. So this is a recording of the electrical changes during a cardiac cycle. There are three different factors that they measure. The first is the P wave, which is the depolarization of the atria, the QRS complex, which is the depolarization of the ventricles, and then the T wave, which is the repolarization of the ventricles. And those three factors, we've got the P here, T here, QRS there, all function together to create readings on an EKG or an ECG. You've got a lot more information on this in your notes if you want to go through that on your own. I do want to give you a little bit of practice analyzing these ECG results. So on the left, we've got 3 electrocardiogram results. In general, they'll do a 6-second skip to see how the heart is functioning. So they'll measure for 6 seconds the different electrical impulses in the heart, and it produces these charts here. There are 3 types of malfunctions that are pretty common that can be caught with an ECG. The first is tachycardia, which is when the heart rate is fast, bradycardia, which is when it's slow, and then arrhythmia, which is when it is irregular. So I want you to pause the video here. Go ahead and try to identify of these 3, which of these 3 phenomena are occurring. After you pause, we'll go over the answers together. All right, so our first one is tachycardia. We want to know which of these is the fastest, and we can see that by how close together these periods are. So tachycardia would be represented here. Bradycardia is a slower heart rate, which we can see here. And then arrhythmia is when it's irregular. So if we look at this final one down here, you can see that they're very close together beats here, very fast, and then much slower later on the ECG. Now, our cardiac cycle is actually controlled by our brain, right? So there's a cardiac center in the medulla oblongata, which is a part of the brain. You guys looked at brains when we did our sheep brain dissection. And it increases and decreases as a response to changes in state in our body or external factors. We've talked about this before. It's a process known as homeostasis, when we're returning to our normal. One question I wanted to ask you is, can your heart continue to beat even if your cerebrum is not functioning? So take a second, pause the video, think about that, and come back. So the answer to this question is actually yes. The heart has its own pacemaker inside of it on one of its valves, so the heart can continue to beat even after the brain ceases to function. This is why we can do heart transplants, because if you place a heart in a saline solution, then it will continue to function as normal. So now we're moving into 13.4, which is our blood vessels. When we're talking about blood vessels, there are 3 major categories. You've got arteries, which carry blood away from the heart, veins, which carry it to it, and then capillaries. So arteries are vessels which carry blood away from the heart. I remember that because A for away is for arteries. The smallest ones, if we look at this image here, are called arterioles. And the arterioles connect to the capillaries right here. Veins are thinner and less muscular, and they carry blood to the heart. So the blood is deoxygenated, they're carrying it back to the heart so it can reoxygenate. And veins have smaller parts called venules right here, which then connect to the capillaries. Capillaries actually go through pretty much all the tissue in our body. So they have these walls made out of single squamous cells, which we talked about in our integumentary system. So they're very thin. And the reason they're very thin is they allow materials like oxygen and other nutrients to flow between the blood and the surrounding tissue. So capillaries are how we get blood to the different tissues in our body. When we're talking about blood flow, we have to have ways for our body to control that. So first we have something called precapillary sphincters. These are these circles that kind of look like valves, and they are found at arterial capillary junctions. Their job is to either constrict or dilate. Constrict means to get smaller, dilate means to get larger. And we call this vasoconstriction and vasodilation in order to regulate the flow of blood throughout. So this is a normal one. This is one that's been vasoconstricted. This is one that has vasodilated. And you can see there's just more volume for blood to travel through. The sphincters actually open and close to regulate how much blood gets through. Now, sometimes if blood isn't flowing properly, then you can end up with clots. So if a person doesn't move enough, they can get blood clots because skeletal muscle movement actually helps facilitate blood flow. But the different valves in the veins are supposed to prevent the backflow of that blood. If your skeletal muscles compress because you're not moving, then they force the blood toward the heart. You've also probably seen people with varicose veins. They happen more in older people than younger. And this is when blood pools in the veins. So it can happen as a result of not moving. Sometimes people get them from flying on airplanes because of pressure differences. But you can see in a normal vein, the valves will close to send the blood back through the body. But in a varicose vein, it stays open and the blood will pool in that particular area. So now let's move on to our major blood vessels. Sorry, I can't seem to get that out of the way. Anyway, so our first one is the aorta. The aorta has a couple of parts that are important. It has an ascending aorta that's going up, the aortic arch, and the descending aorta, and then finally the abdominal aorta. The aorta is the largest artery in the body. Remember, that's the one carrying blood away. And it leaves through the left ventricle of the heart, which we learned about last class. Next up is the pulmonary trunk. This one splits left and right. Both of them lead to the lungs and also leave through the left ventricle. Then we have our pulmonary veins. These are the ones that take the blood from the lungs to the heart. So they connect to the left atrium. Remember, that's on the right side if we're looking at an image, just because it's kind of like stage directions. And then we have the superior and inferior vena cava. So these return blood from the head and body to the heart and connect at the right atrium. So if we're looking at the aorta, here are its different parts. This is the descending aorta because it's going down. The red is the arch, and then you have different arteries connected to it, which help to move that blood. So the coronary arteries supply blood to the heart itself. This word coronary usually references the heart if you see it. Then we have the brachiocephalic artery. This one has two major parts, the right subclavian, which gives blood to our arms, and then the right common carotid. Your carotid artery you can see in your neck. It's one of these large ones here. So this is the brachiocephalic trunk. Here's where it splits into those two parts right here. And then you have your left common carotid right here, which is going to move blood to your head. We have the left subclavian artery, which supplies blood to the left arm. And then what you should know about these is that the vessels are not symmetrical. So they don't line up with each other on opposite sides of the body. Here's another image of the aorta and its different parts. So here's that descending aorta we discussed, the ascending aorta, the right and left coronary arteries. This is that arch because it's the part where it arches here. The brachiocephalic, the right subclavian, the right common, and then the left common and the left subclavian artery. Again, these are not symmetrical, so they don't match on either side of these pumps. That is all we're going to cover in notes today, so you guys can use the rest of your class time to complete your case study. Make sure you upload that on time. And if you have any questions, you can office hours and I'll help you with those.